Hello again. Here we are back to talk about JavaScript. Hopefully the article on the callbacks was useful. I like that website, JavaScript Info. They have a lot of really great information and good examples there. So let's solve the problem here with the error. Okay. So the idea is if something goes wrong here, we want to be able to call an error, and there's a couple ways for us to do that. A really common way to do that is to include a second callback to handle the error. And you may have seen this. This happens a lot in JavaScript, right? A lot of libraries will use this, right? And imagine, I'm going to move this somewhere else. So this is a function, so we can actually define it somewhere else. So I'm going to say function success, right? And so our success function takes data as a parameter, and it's going to console log that data. So I'll make a success function right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the callback here and replace it with success, right? And then let's change this to on success, right? And then I'll change this one to on error. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new function down here called on error. And this function will take an error message and console log that error message. Okay. And now that we've got two parameters here, I'm going to go up to get weather, and I'm going to say error callback. There we go, right? So I got callback, or maybe this could have been success callback. This is going to be error callback, right? So if I have the callback here and everything is successful, then this happens, right? And we can test that. Let's give it a try here. So we'll run our code. 2 seconds later, we get the weather data, right? But what if something went wrong when we were fetching the weather? And we're using this timeout to simulate the process of connecting with the server. We'll actually connect to a server later and grab the data, the actual data, right? So anyway, so what if we have an error? Well, what we'll do is we'll say, error callback. We'll call this instead, and we'll pass a message in. We'll say, the server is broken, right? And so now when I call this function, it's going to wait 2 seconds, right? So it's going to do this, wait 2 seconds, and then when it resolves, it's going to call the error callback. It's going to call this code right here, and that will call the function down below here, right? Right, so it's going to call this function, and then that function will print our error message. Okay, so let's run our code again. Oh, the server is broken, right? Okay, so that's really good, but this kind of runs into, and you saw if you read the article, they had a section on the pyramid of doom, right? So this kind of runs into that situation of pyramid of doom where we could have a lot of really complicated stuff. And especially like earlier you saw that I had this on success and on error. And if I actually wrote the functions in here like this, and then I wrote another one here, this could get pretty ugly, okay? It could start to get pretty complicated and be kind of a problem, right, to read. That actually doesn't read too bad, but it is kind of not super easy to understand, right? So what can we do, right? Let's improve on our work here. So one of the things that JavaScript has given us is called a promise. And a promise is an object that actually it kind of just does what we're doing here. It takes two functions, a resolve and a reject. So on a resolve, you get the data or you get whatever the promise resolves to, and on a reject, you imagine that an error happened, okay? So what if we wanted to work with a promise here? Okay, let's do that. So I'm going to delete all the code that I had before, and I'm just going to go back to where I have this get weather and this callback, and I'm actually going to remove the callbacks here. Okay, so I just got the get weather function, and then I'm going to call the get weather function and try and resolve it to some data. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to return a new promise. Usually you won't have to create your own promise. A lot of services that are built in, or a lot of things in the API, just return a promise automatically, right? So usually you won't be making a promise. More often you'll just be using the promise that is returned, but by learning how to make your own promise, it'll make more sense how those promises work, right? So here's our new promise here, and new promise takes a function as a parameter. So you can put a function in here. You can use a callback, an arrow function, right? And this function takes two parameters. It takes a resolve and a reject, okay? So we're going to take resolve and reject. And you'll notice here I'm making a new object, and that's what's getting returned down here. So actually the data right here is going to be, I'm going to put a P there for promise, okay? Right? Oops, wait, resolve, I misspelled it. There we go, right? So here I've got get weather. It's going to create a new promise, and then that promise has a function in it that takes a resolve and a reject method. Okay, so it takes resolve and reject. So it has to have a promise, or it has to have a function, a callback inside promise as a parameter, and then that callback takes two parameters, resolve and reject. Okay. And then over here, if we call get weather, what we get is we get new promise in the variable P. Okay, so let's imagine that our weather data, we're going to do like set timeout, and set timeout is going to take a, some kind of callback here, and it's going to wait 2 seconds, and then it's going to resolve. So I'm going to say, oops, I said remove. I want to do resolve, right? And what it's going to do is it's going to resolve and return the data that we're looking for. So I'm going to say description, and let's say today is sunny and warm, okay? And then the temperature is 72 degrees. Okay, so we can run our code here, and nothing's going to happen yet, right? But how do we handle the resolved promise, right? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say promise.then, okay? And the .then allows us to set like what happens when you resolve. So you can think about the callback function that you put inside here as resolve, right? We saw earlier we created a callback, we put a function here, and we named it callback up here, and we got it. But in this case, when we call promise.then, we give it a function, and that function is the resolve function. So this function should receive this data. So I'll put a variable here, and then it can do something with that data. So for example, if I want to log the data, I'll do that, right? Let's give it a try. So I'll run my code again. We wait 2 seconds. Oh, and then there's the temperature data, right? Or the weather data, okay? What if we want to handle a rejection? So let's imagine that something happened here inside our code, and our promise wants to reject. It's like, hey, the weather service is down. I got a 500 error or a 404 or something like that. So what you would do is you would call reject, and you would pass in the error message or anything you want. We can actually create it could be a string, right? What if we create our own error, right? So you can create a new error with new error, right? So I'll create new error here, and I'll say message server is broken. Classic error message, right? Okay. So in this case, when we run our code, I'm going to clear that and run it again, and I see the error message here, right? It's like, hey, unhandled, unhandled promise rejection warning, error, server is broken. So actually I generated this error, right? What if we wanted to handle that error? What we could do down here is we could say promise.catch. So you've got a promise object. It's an object that has methods, and we can call the then method to handle the promise when it resolves, and we can call the promise's catch method to catch an error that the promise had generated. Okay? So I'm going to catch the error here, and then I can console log the error message. So I'll say error.message, right? And error.message, like if error is a message, is an error object, then it gives me the string here that was the message, okay? So, so we'll run our code again, and this time we wait 2 seconds to find out the server is broken, and then I get my server is broken message here, okay? So that's kind of working, right? We can shorten the code here also. So I kind of wrote this in the longest way, but if getWeather returns a promise, you can, you don't have to actually receive it and store it in a variable. What we can do is, since it's returning the P right here, we can just call .then on getWeather. Right, so some people write it like this. They put it on the next line after the dot. So it's just getWeather return a resolve to a promise, and we can call .then on that promise, right? So this could be here, and then the same thing with catch, right? So catch could go on the end. Now this is pretty ugly, so if we put a line return there, it reads a lot better, right? And then you could shorten this too, since we're using the arrow function, so we can get rid of the parentheses around the single parameter, and we can get rid of the curly brackets here on the on a single, if we have a single line of code, we can get rid of the curly brackets, right? So then that reads pretty good. We can say, hey, getWeather, then handle the weather data this way, otherwise catch an error and handle it like this. And then this should work the same way as it did before. Let's go back to our resolve here, right? And then 2 seconds later, oh, we get the sunny, warm 72 degrees message. Okay, so that's really good. Let's stop there. Here's what I want you to do is I want you to read up on promise. Okay, so JS Info has a great page on promises. Read through this because it has a lot more information on it. I just did an example. You can follow my example, rebuild it, rewind the video, look at it, test it for yourself. Compare it to what's here, and then read this article here. It's not too long, a couple pages, right? And I'll put a link to this in the video, or you can just Google it. It's javascript.info promise, okay? And then we'll continue in the next video. Thanks for watching.